we're pleased to welcome you to the AUSA Noon Report, our virtual series featuring senior Army leaders providing important updates on key defense topics. Our host today is AUSA's Vice President for Membership and Meetings, Lieutenant General Patricia McQuestion, U.S. Army retired.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Association of the United States Army's Noon Report. While we wish we could all be together at AUSA headquarters here, that's just not possible right now. So we've crafted a series of events to bring you senior defense leaders speaking on topics of current interest and to keep us all connected. This is our 6th Noon Report since we've started them on the 8th of June this year. We're very glad you've joined us today and appreciate your support. Our guest speaker today is Lieutenant General Charles Flynn, who has served as the Deputy Chief of Staff, G-357, Headquarters Department of the Army since June of last year. General Flynn has served in a variety of command, staff, and leadership positions from platoon leader to division commander. He commanded the 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, deploying both to Operations Enduring and Iraqi Freedom, and then another deployment to Iraq in support of OIF as the commander of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division. He has served as the Director, Mission Command Center of Excellence, and as the Acting Commanding General, United States Army Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Other assignments include Deputy Commanding General Operations of the 82nd Airborne Division, Assistant G-357 Readiness at Army Forces Command, as the 25th Infantry Division Commander, Tropic Lightning, and Deputy Commanding General, U.S. Army Pacific Command. Prior to his current assignment, Lieutenant General Flynn was Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, G-357. He's a graduate of the United States Naval War College and holds master's degrees in National Security and Strategic Studies and Joint Campaign Planning and Strategy. I also found out he's an alumnus of the University of Rhode Island. And if you want to read the best bio ever, take a look at the one his alma mater has posted on their website. They are very proud of him. If you have questions for General Flynn, please use the Q&A tab on the lower right side of your screen, as the slide that we've just posted indicates. General Flynn will make his remarks, and then we'll turn to as many of your questions as time will allow. Now, please help me welcome General Flynn.
Pat, thanks very much, and really thanks to everybody out there today that has joined us. And I will try to get through my remarks in about 20 minutes to capitalize on the question and answers, because I know that's essentially far more important than any of the remarks that I'll make up front. And let me just say to AUSA, to General Ham, Pat, you, and the Board of Directors for doing this. These events in times like this are really helpful for us to continue to outreach to so many in the community and wherever you might be across the globe because of the importance of what we're doing and the importance of what AUSA represents for our ability to communicate to the public. Normally, I would start some of these discussions or talks with a joke, but actually nobody's here to listen to that joke, and nor will I get anybody to give me any feedback, so I'm not going to bother with the joke today. But I will tell you why I am here. So for those that may not be aware, as the G-357, I am effectively the lead synchronizer and lead integrator and synchronizer for the Secretary of the Army and the Chief. And today I'm really going to talk about the Army's readiness framework. And that readiness framework revolves around these 4 C's that I'll discuss today: competition, crisis, conflict, and change. This framework actually really evolved out of answering a question, ready for what? We get that question often. What is the Army getting ready for? Well, obviously, our mission is to deploy, fight, and win, do that anytime, anywhere, in any part of the globe in order to defend the nation. But we actually have to operate in these 4 conditions all the time. And that slide, if you don't mind, if you could just pop that up. Okay, there we have it. Okay, so for everybody in the audience, I just want to frame my remarks and my comments around these 4 C's today. This covers from the tactical through the operational to the strategic level. It covers about what we're doing today as an Army and about what we're going to be doing into the future. And it's really about a set of conditions that we have to operate in all the time. And they're overlapping. particularly with the speed of activity across the globe today. And again, why do we do this? Because at the end of the day, the United States Army, it builds readiness to win. So let me jump to the first C, competition. This is really a discussion and military activities where it is long-term strategic competition against near-peer threats, namely China and Russia, but also against regional threats, North Korea, Iran, and then even global activities that are violent extremism. And we compete within a framework of having access, presence, and influence. And we do that at every echelon, again, at the tactical, operational, and strategic, but we also do it through the terrestrial layer, the aerial layer, and the space layer. And we do it through a continuum of activities, whether they be cyber, whether they be information, whether they be exercises and training, electronic warfare. And we're doing that all the time in competition alongside our allies and partners in over 180 countries. Your Army, it's always in motion. And so how do we compete? Well, we compete by conducting joint interoperability day-to-day operations. We do that with and through our Army Service Component Commanders. We do that in support of the geographical and functional combatant commanders. And we promote that interoperability with our allies and partners through exercises, exchanges, international military education and training. We do it even through foreign military sales, where the interoperability of those systems that we train with are US, and we share lessons learned in TTPs. But most of all, what we're doing with our allies and partners is we're making sure that our soldiers are foremost in those formations because they represent our values. And they represent those values that we're out as an extension of this great country. And we do this to try to maintain that strategic predictability with our allies and partners, while at the same time being operationally unpredictable, moving around the globe. Let me give you an example. Just last year, we did over 80 brigade-sized movements globally in one calendar year. That is an enormous activity that we do to compete as a military, as an Army, with the joint force across the globe. Of course, our ACOMs and our Army Service Component Commanders, they're out there every day, manning, training, equipping, organizing at every one of these echelons. They do that by setting the theater. They do that by extending their mission command networks. They employ, they protect, and they sustain. And they do that worldwide through all the operations and trainings and training exercises that they do. So in the end, what the Army really does to build readiness is we win in competition. And we try to do that by winning without fighting, which is essentially the essence of deterrence. And we are ready for any emergent or unforeseen or unforecasted demands. And so when that demand, unforeseen, emerges, we get ready and we execute the second C of this in crisis. Some of you may be aware in the recent National Defense Strategy of this term, dynamic force employment. In dynamic force employment, we must be ready for any planned and unplanned crisis. We have to be able to do this anytime, any place, against any threat, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a wildfire, a terror attack, a nation-state armed aggression, or even a global pandemic, which is amongst our midst right now. So recently, let me just describe 3 dynamic force employments that the Army has been involved with really like in the last 6.5 months. These were globally integrated operations. They were across every domain, and they were conducted by all of the compos. The first one, there was a recent crisis in the Middle East. Many of you are aware of the Soleimani strike. We had to deploy forces on no notice. Some went over and de-escalated the situation while others went over to set the theater. And they were ready to transition to conflict if necessary. The second one, the global response to COVID, an unprecedented response of a public health crisis that reached into every geographical combatant commander to include NORTHCOM here in the homeland. the synergy that was created through the Army Service Combatant Commanders, our major commands, the interagency, Army North, the National Guard, the Reserve, and our medical community. It's unprecedented and unparalleled. It was a enormously complex operation that was conducted only because the Army is always ready in crisis to respond to these unplanned events. And then the third one, and it goes on today, of course, we have in excess of about 7,000 Army National Guard that are prepared to support civil authority if required. And all of this work gets done through all of our commands. It gets done at every echelon. It's in support of federal authority, state authorities, local authorities, and the medical community, and across the Army. We just had an enormous sense of participation by all of these commands, and it was a masterful stroke. The Army builds readiness in crisis, and we do this why do we do this? We want to reduce that risk, particularly as we transition. And then we also want to make sure that the force is in a posture or in a stance to be able to respond to any escalation. And so in this particular instance, this is where the Army has to be prepared for war. And we have to always be ready for that war, which then leads to the third C, conflict. This is the Army's mission: to deploy, fight, and win in any conflict at large-scale combat operations. And we have to be able to do that simultaneously with defending the homeland, disrupting any aggressors, and deterring those that might want to do harm to us. We recently have built the highest levels of tactical readiness. Our Army senior leaders trust the great work that's been going on by all the commanders, particularly Forces Command and General Garrett and his team, as they have built BCTs into those highest levels of readiness over the last number of decades. Now, the Army is not BCTs alone, and we don't fight with just BCTs. We are also laser focused at readiness at the other echelons, the operational and strategic layers. Operational readiness represents how the Army is going to fight at the operational level of war, doing things like General Funk and General Rainey have done to weave all of this work into our professional military education, schools, and training. We've put it out into our combat training centers. We've built capabilities at the operational level with the recent announcement of 5th Corps and the return of 5th Corps. We conduct warfighters. We conduct JTF certifications. We conduct joint warfighting assessments. We certify our CJFLICs across the globe. We do all this at the operational level of war so that we can then harvest the success at the strategic level by maintaining strategic readiness. Again, great work done here by commands like General Daly at Army Materiel Command. Investments that have been made in our installations, investments that have been made into our Army preposition stocks, the ability to conduct strategic movement while supporting operational maneuver. We do this at speed. We do this at scale. We do this in any theater so that we can mobilize, deploy, and sustain those forces anytime, anywhere in support of any geographical combatant commander. And we do this for the duration of any crisis or any conflict. Building strategic readiness, an example of this recently is the planning that has gone on into our Defender series, Defender Europe and Defender Pacific. And in 22, we intend to do an exercise called Global Defender. This is invaluable planning, and it builds in muscle memory for the Army to, again, support our allies and partners, but also work on our war-winning competencies at echelon. The Army builds that readiness in conflict to remain the preeminent land power by providing highly lethal, combat-credible land forces anytime, anywhere. All of this must be done throughout the 4th C, which is the change for the future. We do this through competition. We do it in crisis. We have to do it even though we're preparing for conflict. Future readiness requires a transformational change. It's where the Army must adapt and it has to innovate to the new conditions. Our future readiness depends on the simultaneity of modernizing the force for the future while also meeting the current demands and having ready forces at the tactical and operational level. Some tough decisions are to be made in the near future. We've got a shrinking window, we've got fiscal uncertainty, but we have to set the conditions for that change through the planning. And we're doing this through the use of the Army Campaign Plan. We're also doing this through the Regional Aligned Readiness and Modernization Model. It's setting conditions for change. It is a model that we're going to use to meet the steep demands of today while also carving out some time for formations to go through those modernization as we field the new equipment and ask them to conduct training on that new equipment. And we're thankful to Army Futures Command and General Murray and his leadership by establishing the Aim Point Force of 2035. The Aim Point gives us a plan, and it's central to our future operating concept of multi-domain operations. That multi-domain operations consists of 3 tenets: calibrated force posture. We realize that posture equals a relationship in each one of the global combatant commands, and it allows us to compete. We also recognize that we're going to have to introduce multi-domain formations. You may be aware of the multi-domain task force. It's the hallmark of our experimental formation and part of our future force. This multi-domain formation will be supported by integrated air missile defense, long-range precision fires, soldier lethality, next-gen ground combat vehicle, future vertical lift, and our network modernized, the 6 modernization priorities that the Chief and the Secretary are making sure are integrated into our future force. And then why are we doing this? This is all based on the 3rd tenet of joint convergence. Cross-domain synergy, redundant kill chains, joint kill chains, under a mesh network of mission command, where any sensor, any shooter, any C2 node in near real time allows us to enable the joint force and to win decisively. So we're building that readiness, again, to win through change. And we're going to win in each of these 4 C's, whether we're out competing, out responding to crisis, out winning in conflict, and out winning in modernizing the force through our future and the change that we know is apparent across all 4 of these aspects of this framework. A final point I'll make: our most important aspect of Army readiness is our people. They are the foundation of the Army. The Chief of Staff of the Army's priority is people first. I equate that to ready people equals a ready Army. And that's what we try to help them with in the G357, integrating and synchronizing across all the commands. And we do that through the necessary element, in fact, the most essential element of combat power, leadership. So really, in conclusion, I just wanted to answer the question, ready for what? The Army is getting ready for what we know are all these conditions where we have to win in. We have to win in competition, win in crisis, win in conflict, and we have to win adapting and innovating through change. And we're going to do that at every echelon. We're going to generate tactical units that are highly trained, highly disciplined, and fit. We're going to marshal the ability to conduct strategic movement at speed and scale, and we're going to deliver to the combatant commanders at point of need to support their operational maneuver. I'm confident we will win because we have teamwork, we have the leaders, and we have our people. Building readiness to deploy, fight, and win under any conditions, anywhere, anytime, today and in the future. People first, winning matters. And I'll pause there and take any questions from the field. So the first question I have here is, I'll just read it to those out on the webinar. About 6 months ago, the Army created a new directorate within your office to focus on fusing non-kinetic capabilities both across the service and the joint community. Can you tell us a little more about the Army's Office of Strategic Operations and what happened to the functions performed by the previous entity, G-3 Cyber, which primarily focused on cyberspace and operations? Yes, great question. In fact, I noticed this morning there was an article by, it was an interview recently by Brigadier General Marty Klein, who is the Director of Strategic Operations. Okay, so within the G357, we had a couple of smaller directorates, I'll say, outside what we refer to as the core 4+1. And it was cyber, electronic warfare. We had network mission command. And so what we did, and space, what we did was, as the multi-domain operations, the future operating concept continues to evolve, we recognize that actually having these disparate parts in the G357 did not create the coordination and synchronization that we needed just within the G357. Moreover, we needed that to reach out to the Joint Staff, OSD, the major commands, the ASCCs, to conduct that kind of integrated planning and coordination. So in concert with my other leaders in the G357, we came up with a plan to build, if you will, the G357 Strategic Operations Directorate. We placed a 1-star in charge of it, and it has turned out to be exactly what we needed to conduct that coordination holistically within that group. There have been a couple other changes inside the G357. If you're not aware, I'll make sure that here I'll use this as a platform. We now have the Joint Capabilities Office for Counter UAS, which merged into our Fires Directorate in the G357. That's led by Major General Sean Gainey. So yes, there's been a couple of organizational adjustments in the G357, and it's all part of our thinking and our learning and our adjustment to these changing environments that I just spoke of earlier in the presentation. The next question is one on multi-domain logistics. General Goldfein yesterday said that Chairman Milley had assigned each service a lead role for part of joint all-domain operations, and the Army taking the lead for joint logistics under fire. Can you speak to the Army's contribution here? Yes. In concert with the Joint Staff and the Department of Defense, the chairman, along with the members of the JCS, are leading an effort on development of a joint warfighting concept. Below that joint warfighting concept, there are 4 functional concepts that are being written. One is on C2, one is on fires, one is on information advantage, and another is on contested logistics. The contested logistics concept, the joint concept for contested logistics, as a functional concept in support of the joint warfighting concept, the lead for that concept work is the Army. Much of that is being done with Army Futures Command. On the Army staff, our lead rep for that is the G4, Lieutenant General Dwayne Gamble. And of course, we are doing that hand in glove with Army Materiel Command and the other Army major commands, so we get the most value out of that conceptual work in support of the joint warfighting concept. The next question. Can you talk more about what you envision the Army's greatest challenges are that lie ahead? If the greatest challenge is balancing current and future readiness, which one of these would you place first? I'm not sure I could place either one of them first because they both have to be done. I think what we've done with the Army campaign plan and the model that I mentioned earlier before, rearm, what we're trying to do is balance the current demands that are placed on the Army in each of the combatant commanders to be able to meet our gift map requirements, directed readiness requirements, and any unplanned or unforecasted crisis that may emerge, while at the same time being able to take formations that we know are going to receive modern capabilities, whether they are part of the signature programs that Army Futures Command is developing, or whether they're just an upgrade of current equipment that we have. We recognize that we're going to have to carve out time in our model to be able to dedicate the time for the leaders and the organization to focus on that modernization effort. So this is where the G357 and the headquarters Department of the Army staff, along with the major commands and the ASCCs, working with our global or geographical combatant commanders and functional combatant commanders, we really do have to create that synergy for us to be able to do these missions that we're asked to do across the globe. But we also have to make sure that we take time with each of the formations to dedicate their leaders and soldiers to making sure that when we get those new capabilities on board, that we can apply those capabilities out into the geographical combatant commanders and into our crisis response and into our war plans. Next question, is USAR going to be a component command for AFRICOM or have missions in that AOR in addition to EUCOM? There's some planning underway. I'm not going to go into any details of that right now, but we are doing some planning like we always do, given some of the recent announcements with Europe. But other than that, I'm going to pause there on any further discussion of that. Next question was, you mentioned rearm, but it sounds very familiar to R4Gen. How is this different? What makes rearm unique? Well, I touched on it a little bit in my last answer, but let me expand a little bit here. So what we're really trying to do is make sure that we come up with a cycle system so that we can ensure that we've got periods of time dedicated for manning, training, equipping, and organizing our formations. And we have to do that at echelon. We have to do that because, as many of you know, beginning in about 22, 23, we're going to begin to have advanced capabilities through the efforts of Army Futures Command start to land in some of our formations. And when that time comes, we're going to have to make sure that we can receive those advanced capabilities and those advanced systems and make sure that we carve out enough time for those units to become experts in that new capability. So we're trying to take the next number of months over the really course of the next year and make sure that we put in place a model where we can do that by receiving these advanced capabilities and these advanced technologies, while at the same time not being able to continue to meet the readiness demands of the global combatant commanders and our Army service component commanders, and really just the ability to maintain tactical readiness day to day so we can respond in crisis or in conflict. There's another question down on the screen here. Can you talk more about Global Defender, what it will entail, what you envision? Well, it's a little ways off. It's still in 22. I'll tell you conceptually what we're thinking about here is that like we have done Global Defender Europe and Defender Pacific, Global Defender is one where we're going to execute that operation here in the continental United States. We're going to try to stitch together some experimental work and some of the training center work. At the same time, deploy forces across the country, but also out into Europe and the Pacific and into other geographical combatant commanders. We obviously have a lot of work ahead of us to do this, but we think it's important to execute that in the 22 timeframe. That gives us a little bit of time, and kind of tying it back to the earlier comment I made. We're going to begin to see some of these advanced capabilities in 22, and we want to be able to showcase those capabilities here, right here in the United States. Next question. Given the reductions in forward deployed forces, our reliance on strategic mobility takes on greater significance to get to a potential fight. Our nation's sea lift and airlift is and has been underfunded. How is the Army making the case for appropriate funding and priority from sister services for these assets? If we can get there, we can win. Well, I absolutely agree with your statement at the end there. If we can get there, we can win. But I think it's more than just getting there. So sea lift and airlift. Yes, there is discussions going on with the other services about sea lift and airlift, but I would express to you out there that it's more than that. We have taken great strides in Army pre-positioned stocks across the globe. We do that work with Army Materiel Command. We do that work with the Army Service Combatant Component Commanders, and we do that in concert with the Joint Staff, OSD, and the Geographical Combatant Commanders. And we also do that with our allies and partners. And so I think this notion of calibrated force posture is really what we're talking about being and gaining a position of advantage by making sure that we have the right materials in the right place at the right time, that our formations can move at speed and at scale in order to capitalize on that, and that an expression of that is the exercises and the training that we do across each of the combatant commands every day across the globe. We do this, and that is a form of rehearsal by essentially deploying on those exercises where we can access some of that Army pre-positioned stock. For example, we're doing a dynamic force employment right now into Europe. They are drawing APS, and they are going out and linking up with the poles and conducting training. And this is probably the third time we've done that in Europe in the last 14 months. We do the same thing out in the Pacific. In fact, during the response to COVID and the global pandemic, we went into Army pre-positioned stocks, and we had to use some of those stocks available to help us in that response, not just here in the continental United States, but overseas as well. Can you give an update on how the Army's combat training centers are operating under the current conditions of COVID-19? Have all the CTCs resumed with unit rotations? If so, do they look different in the pandemic environment? Well, let me answer the second part of that question first. Yes, they have resumed. Are the current conditions at the CTCs taken into account? Yes, they have. There is a series of checks that the units go through at home station. And then we do the same thing upon arrival at the combat training centers. We've layered in extra testing capability and capacity at those. In fact, I think this month is when our first National Guard unit goes to the National Training Center. And so we've now have our third combat training center underway here in the continental United States between the Joint Readiness Training Center and the National Training Center. And of course, the training center in Europe had a pause, if you will, for a little bit, but they've been up and operating really throughout. A question, Army contributions beyond BCTs. How is the Army strengthening the echelons above brigade to support the whole joint force from long-range precision fires to logistics and communications? Well, this is a little bit of a longer-term fix here. So there's some great work going on across the force modernization enterprise of the Army. Work going on between TRADOC and the Combined Arms Center, Army Futures Command, and right here in the G-357 Force Modernization Directorate. They are looking at echelons above the brigade. We're looking at those organizations, and we're making sure that we have the right balance across all the compos, and then, of course, at the tactical, operational, and strategic echelons. There's a lot of hard work that has to be done here. It's very complicated. It is not a quick fix overnight, and we have to be mindful of the adjustments we need to make when these advanced capabilities come from Army Futures Command. This is a part of our how the Army fight effort that TRADOC and the Combined Arms Center have underway. They're doing that with an eye towards the Aimpoint 2035 force that Army Futures Command has put together. And so this effort to try to see ourselves is really important as we modernize the force and get ready for that change that I talked about earlier in my remarks. Can you expand a bit, can you expand a bit on the future of 5th Corps at Knox, given the advent of USA's proposed drawdown of 10,000? So I'll expand on this in this way. 5th Corps is building at Fort Knox, and we are manning, equipping, and placing that Corps headquarters into those facilities. And that will all is on a path to be fully manned and fully equipped and in its facilities in the October timeframe. Shortly thereafter, it'll begin doing coordination with the United States Army Europe because it will be focused on Europe. And they have a training path after that, but there's some great work going on between Forces Command, Army Materiel Command, Human Resources Command, and United States Army Europe and Headquarters Department of the Army to create that 5th Corps and build that 5th Corps just as quickly as we can. Can you talk more on how you see the Army's data cloud efforts enabling convergence or even futuristic technology like artificial intelligence and robotics? And there's a large effort underway through what we call a data migration cloud development strategy that we have that really is being brought together between Army Futures Command and Headquarters Department of the Army through a board that we've established. This data migration cloud development effort is really looking at where all of the Army's data is stored. It's primarily stored through 4 different locations. One of those locations is the warfighting mission area that I own, and another one that the G-2 owns called the intelligence mission area. And I will just tell you that what Army Futures Command is doing in their experiments and in their exercises that they have planned out over the next couple of years through a project called Project Convergence. We are doing mission thread, what we call mission thread use cases as a part of these experiments, and we are learning where our data is, how we can access that data, how we can create standards for that data, and then how we can understand where that data needs to be so that we can access it in the cloud to be able to create that notion of convergence that I spoke of earlier, where it's any sensor, any shooter, any C2 node in near real time to enable the joint kill chain. How can the G3 better inform Army leaders at the tactical level to reduce misinformation and increase trust regarding future changes? Well, one of them is this webinar here today. Another is I put out every Friday a note on an unclassed network called the Green Note, my weekly Green Note, and then I also put out a monthly newsletter to the G357 team. So those are 3 ways that we're trying to communicate more broadly about informing the Army, if you will, so we can increase trust, and so we can be far more transparent about what the Army has going on. Okay, I think I'm on my last question. How are the training requirements or needs changing during the pandemic? Well, during the global pandemic, obviously, and we remain in a fight with a pathogen that is changing. And so I think what we've done is that empowering the senior commanders out at each one of the local installations and trying to power down to them to make decisions has really enabled them to calibrate the kind of training that they need to do on each one of their installations. When the pathogen first hit, it was a little hard to see that. And so we had to really stop or really put a pause and slow the Army way down. I'll use a car analogy. I think we hit the brakes, but we didn't stop. We went down to about 10 miles an hour. And now with the combat training centers opening back up, home station training beginning again, people starting to PCS, and then other tactical operations and deployments going on across the globe, I would say we're picking up our speed. And as we pick up our speed, we have to put in those conditions at each one of the installations to make sure that we're protecting our people, so that we can posture the force, so that we can protect the nation. And I think that we've kept that vision of the chief and secretary through this entire pandemic, to be able to make sure that we protect our forces so that we can protect the nation. Well, thanks everybody again for coming out today, or at least joining us on the webinar. Pat, thank you and AUSA for setting these up and allowing us to communicate to the community. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, General Flynn, for that very insightful conversation and for answering all those questions. We'll make sure that you get a copy of all the questions that were submitted today, and you can take a look at them. And thank you so much for the audience participation today. We know that you and the entire Army have a lot on your plate. You're doing great things to ensure the Army's readiness now and for the future, and we want you to know that we are here to support you. Before we close, I want to make a comment about our announcement yesterday concerning the 2020 AUSA annual meeting. We announced the difficult but correct decision to convert the 2020 AUSA annual meeting from an in-person meeting to a virtual one. Based on health and safety considerations and ongoing restrictions on large gatherings, it's just not possible for us to conduct an in-person meeting as we planned. We know the announcement came as an enormous disappointment to many of you, and it is to us as well. But that was yesterday's news. Today, we're pouring all our energy into organizing the best virtual event we can possibly deliver. While it may not replace the full experience of the in-person AUSA annual meeting, it will serve to keep us connected with Army senior leaders and their messages, with our industry partners, and with AUSA members around the globe. The dates have changed slightly, so please mark your calendars for 13 through 16 October. We'll keep you posted on a wide variety of opportunities as our planning continues. And while you're waiting for more information on that topic, I also want to inform you about upcoming Noon Reports and Thought Leader events. Join us, please, for the next Noon Report on 29 July with Lieutenant General Scott Dingle, the 45th U.S. Army Surgeon General. There's another Noon Report on 13 August with Major General Joseph McGee, Director of Army Talent Management Task Force. And on 31 August, we'll continue our Army discussion on race with Sergeant Major of the Army Michael Grinston and a group of squad leaders. We also have several thought leader events coming up. This Friday, as a matter of fact, at 10 o'clock, we'll host Don Snedeker for a discussion about his book, Black Horse in Vietnam. On 4 August, Scott Lingenfelter will discuss his book, Desert Redleg. And on 10 August, we'll have author Chris Brose speaking on his book, Kill Chain. To register for these and all AUSA events, please visit our website at ausa.org. Finally, we want to thank all of you who are AUSA members. Membership matters. And through your membership, you support soldiers, Army civilians, and families. And you help us put on quality programs and produce relevant educational products. If you're not a member, make today your first day. Join or renew your membership at ausa.org. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate you.